The stage lights at Steve Harvey's show glowed warmly, but Keanu Reeves looked almost shy as he adjusted his seat. The audience leaned forward, sensing something special was about to happen. Steve's voice, smooth and teasing, cut through the hum of the crowd. "Keanu, people always talk about your kindness, but tonight, I heard there's a moment with Sandra that made even you speechless. Is that true?" Keanu's eyes softened. For a second, it seemed like the room disappeared for him. He took a slow breath and looked down at his hands, almost as if he was holding a memory too fragile to rush. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It was years ago, on a day that wasn't about cameras or red carpets. It was just a small moment. But it changed the way I saw her." The audience went silent. Steve leaned forward. "What happened?" Keanu looked up, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She honored her mother in a way that reminded me of what really matters." The screen behind them flickered, showing a picture of Sandra Bullock laughing with her mother years ago. The image wasn't glamorous, no expensive dresses or bright lights, just a daughter and a mother sharing a laugh. Keanu's gaze lingered on it. "We were in a small town filming late," he began. "It was cold and everyone was tired. Sandra got a call from her mom. I saw her step away, and when she came back, she wasn't Sandra the movie star anymore. She was just a daughter who loved her mom deeply." He paused, his voice almost breaking. "She didn't know anyone was watching. She said to her mom, 'Thank you for teaching me to be kind, even when no one is looking.'" The audience gasped softly. The way Keanu's voice wrapped around those words made them heavy with meaning. Then he revealed something unexpected. After the call, she found a blanket someone had left behind, and instead of heading back to the trailer, she walked down the street. There was a homeless woman sitting near a diner. Sandra didn't just hand her the blanket. She sat with her, listened to her story, and made sure she had a warm meal. She didn't ask anyone to notice. "But I did." Steve's usual playful tone faded. "That's powerful," Keanu nodded. "It was more than kindness. It was respect, the kind that doesn't need applause." The story began to rewind in Keanu's mind, and as he spoke, the show cut to a reenactment clip. The small town was quiet that night, wind whispering through empty streets. Sandra's hands trembled slightly as she held her phone, hearing her mother's voice. She had been under pressure from the film schedule, but her mom's gentle words grounded her. Her mom had always said, "What you do for others when no one's watching is who you really are." After the call, Sandra spotted the diner's neon sign flickering. The woman outside shivered beneath the dark sky. Sandra approached her carefully, her boots crunching on the sidewalk. "Hi, I'm Sandra," she said softly, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The woman looked up, unsure whether to trust her. "You must be freezing," Sandra continued. She wrapped the blanket around the woman's shoulders, then sat down on the curb beside her. The woman's eyes welled up. They began to talk about small dreams, lost chances, and the power of being seen. Sandra ordered food for her, quietly paid the diner without making a scene, and stayed until the woman smiled again. Back on stage, Keanu's voice trembled just enough to show how deeply it affected him. "I've seen a lot of grand gestures in Hollywood, but that night, sitting on that curb, she didn't know anyone would remember. But I did. And I knew then, she wasn't just a great actress. She was the kind of human being my mom taught me to admire." Steve looked genuinely moved. "Keanu, that's—" "Wow." Keanu chuckled softly, almost embarrassed. "She'll probably hate that I'm telling this story." But moments like that, they remind you what love looks like before it becomes a headline. The camera panned across the audience, people wiping tears, holding hands and leaning closer to loved ones. The emotional beat was deep and lingering, but Steve wasn't done. He asked, "Did that moment change things between you two?" Keanu's eyes grew distant again, like he was back in that cold street. "It made me fall deeper for her. Not in some Hollywood way, in a real way. Because love, at least the way I understand it, isn't about the big scenes. It's about the quiet ones, the ones no one claps for." The studio stayed silent long after he spoke. Outside the stage lights, the world kept spinning. Cameras, gossip, headlines. But in that room, everyone felt the weight of a simple truth. Kindness and respect build the strongest bonds. As Steve wrapped the segment, he said, "Folks, this isn't just about Keanu or Sandra. It's about remembering the small moments, the ones that make us better people." The screen faded to black, but the story was only beginning. Viewers didn't know that what came after, the moments off stage, the unexpected twists, the quiet challenges, would test both their resilience and their hearts in ways no one had imagined. The studio applause faded into the background, but the energy in the room clung to the air like a soft echo. Even after Steve Harvey's crew moved to a commercial break, Keanu Reeves stayed seated, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of his coffee mug. His face was calm, but behind his eyes, memories stretched far beyond the stage lights. As the cameras dimmed, Steve leaned closer, his voice dropping to a gentle tone. "Man, you really had the room silent. There aren't many stories left in Hollywood that do that?" Keanu gave a quiet laugh. "It wasn't Hollywood. That's why it mattered." Outside the studio, rain began to patter against the windows. The crew bustled, preparing for the next segment, but Keanu's mind was elsewhere, caught between the past and the weight of the story he had just shared. He remembered the smell of that small-town diner, the flicker of the neon light, and the way Sandra's voice softened when she said her mother's name. After the show wrapped, Keanu stepped out into the cool night. The city was alive, horns blaring, streetlights glowing like tired eyes, but something about the rain felt like a whisper from the past. He pulled his coat tighter and started walking. His phone buzzed. A message from Sandra. "Heard you were on Steve's show. Should I be worried?" Keanu smiled faintly, his thumbs hovering over the screen before typing back. "Maybe a little, but only in the best way." There was a pause before her reply came through. "You didn't." "I did," he wrote. "But I didn't tell them everything." The ellipses on the screen blinked, then vanished. No reply. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, but the silence between their texts carried more weight than words. "Somewhere?" Sandra was probably staring at her phone. Her heart caught between embarrassment and something deeper. Keanu turned a corner and found himself outside a small bookstore that was still open. Its warm yellow light spilled onto the wet pavement. He stepped inside. The smell of old paper and coffee greeted him like an old friend. He wandered past the aisles until he found a quiet corner, memories of Sandra's kindness looping in his mind. A book on the shelf caught his eye, The Language of Small Kindnesses. He pulled it down and flipped through the pages. One line stood out. "Sometimes the smallest gesture holds the loudest truth." He thought about how Sandra, that night on the curb, hadn't done it for applause. She hadn't expected anyone to remember, and yet, here he was, years later, with the memory alive in his chest. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Sandra Bullock sat in her kitchen, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She had just watched a clip of Keanu on Steve's show that a friend sent her. The comments online were already flooding in, people praising Keanu's words, people saying how rare it was to see a man speak with such honesty. Sandra set her phone down and poured herself a cup of tea. Outside her window, the rain whispered against the glass. She closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice echo in her memory. "Always respect people's stories, even the ones they're afraid to tell." It wasn't the memory of the blanket or the diner that moved her the most. It was knowing that Keanu had seen her mother in her actions, that he had recognized the quiet values her mom had planted in her heart. Her thoughts were interrupted by another message from Keanu. "Walk with me tomorrow? Somewhere quiet." She stared at the text, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "You're not off the hook," she finally replied. The next afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed and shining. Keanu waited at a small park, his hands in his pockets. The park was nearly empty, except for a young father pushing a stroller and a jogger passing by with headphones. When Sandra arrived, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, there was no trace of Hollywood glamour, just two friends meeting under an open sky. She walked up to him and raised an eyebrow. "You had to tell that story?" Keanu's lips curved into a small smile. It wasn't a story. It was the truth. They began to walk, their steps crunching softly over damp leaves. You know, Sandra said, glancing sideways at him, my mom used to tell me that kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about what you do when no one is watching. I didn't think anyone was watching that night. I was, Keanu said quietly. They walked in silence for a while. A small dog barked somewhere in the distance. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain and blooming flowers. As they rounded a bend, Sandra noticed a group of teenagers under a tree, laughing loudly. One of them, a girl holding a guitar, was playing a rough melody. Her friends teased her gently, but she kept playing, her face red with embarrassment. Keanu stopped watching. She reminds me of us back then, he said. Shy but trying, Sandra replied. Keanu stepped closer to the girl. Hey, he said softly. That was beautiful. Keep playing, the girl blinked in surprise. Her friends went silent. She strummed again, this time with a little more confidence. Sandra watched the moment unfold, a warm ache in her chest. As they continued walking, Sandra teased him. You know, you're still the same, always noticing the quiet ones. Someone has to, Keanu replied. The sun began to dip lower, casting golden light through the trees. As they reached the park's exit, a sudden shout split the air. Help! They turned. Across the street, a small boy's ball had rolled into the road, and he had followed it without looking. A car rounded the corner, brakes squealing on the wet pavement. Without thinking, Keanu bolted forward. The world seemed to slow. The screech of tires, the boy's wide eyes, the gasp of onlookers. Keanu reached him in time, scooping him into his arms and diving to the side. The car skidded to a halt just feet away. Sandra's heart pounded as she ran to them. The boy was crying, but unharmed. His mother rushed over, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him and thanked Keanu over and over. Keanu brushed it off with a soft, just glad he's okay. But Sandra could see the adrenaline in his shaking hands. As the mother led the boy away, Sandra placed a hand on Keanu's arm. You didn't even hesitate. You wouldn't have either, he said. They stood there for a moment, the city noise resuming around them. Sandra felt something shift, not just gratitude for the boy's safety, but a deep reminder that Keanu wasn't just kind with words. He lived it. As they began walking again, Sandra's phone buzzed, a notification from a news alert. Keanu Reeves saves child from traffic. Someone nearby had captured the moment on video. She glanced at him and he groaned softly. Great, he muttered. That's going to be everywhere. People should see it, she said gently. Not for the fame, but because the world needs reminders like this. The story would spread before sunset. But in that quiet park beneath the fading light, it wasn't about headlines. It was about two people walking side by side, bound by quiet respect, resilience, and the small acts that make the world softer. The video of Keanu scooping the boy to safety spread across social media like wildfire. By morning, every major news outlet had picked it up. Headlines whispered the same message in different words. Keanu Reeves saves child. A quiet hero in a noisy world. Small acts, big hearts. But for Keanu, waking up to a flood of messages wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the memory of the boy's trembling hands, the mother's tears, and Sandra's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and awe as she ran toward him. He sat at his kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling beside him, scrolling through messages from friends and strangers. One caught his attention. It wasn't a fan or a journalist. It was a simple note from a nurse who had seen the video. I watched you save that boy. Yesterday, I was tired and ready to quit my job. Today, I decided to stay. Thank you for reminding me why I chose this work. Keanu put his phone down and stared out the window. The city skyline glimmered under a pale sunrise, and for a moment, he let the silence wrap around him. Meanwhile, Sandra Bullock sat at her own kitchen counter, her hair still tousled from sleep. She was scrolling through her phone, too, watching the same videos and reading the same comments. She smiled softly when she read a post from a teenage girl. Seeing Keanu save that kid made me believe good people still exist. But as she scrolled further, she found something else, a video from years ago. It was an old interview with her mother, taken before her passing. In it, Her mother said, "I taught my daughter that kindness doesn't need applause. If someone notices, that's fine. But the real work is what you do when no one is looking." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. She paused the video and whispered, "You'd like him, Mom. You really would." Later that afternoon, she called Keanu. "You okay?" she asked when he picked up. "Yeah," he replied. "Just not used to all the noise." "You didn't do it for noise." "No," he said quietly. "I did it because that boy needed someone." There was a pause, the kind of pause that carries more meaning than words. "Let's meet tonight," Sandra said finally. "Somewhere quiet." They chose a little rooftop cafe neither of them had visited in years. It was tucked away above an old theater, a place with mismatched chairs and string lights that twinkled like stars. When Keanu arrived, Sandra was already there, leaning on the railing, looking out at the city lights. "You've caused quite a storm," she teased gently when he joined her. "Me?" he said with a small smile. "You're the one who started it all. If you hadn't honored your mom that night, I wouldn't have been watching you so closely." She turned toward him, her eyes soft but searching. "You really mean that?" "More than you know," he replied. A waiter approached quietly, leaving 2 mugs of hot cocoa on the table. Neither of them reached for the mugs right away. They just stood there, shoulders nearly touching, letting the city hum below them. Then Sandra spoke again. "Do you ever think about the moments that never make headlines? The ones no one records?" "All the time," Keanu said. "Those are the ones that change you." They sipped their cocoa in silence for a while, until laughter drifted up from the street below. A group of street performers had gathered a small crowd. Curious, Sandra leaned over the railing to watch. A young man with a battered guitar was singing a soft, aching song. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, stood near him, holding a sign that said, "For my sister's surgery." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Let's go down." They descended the narrow staircase and slipped into the small crowd. The boy's voice cracked a little as he sang, but the emotion in his words silenced the street's usual noise. Sandra reached into her bag, pulled out some cash, and quietly slipped it into the girl's box. Keanu did the same, but he didn't stop there. He knelt to the little girl's level. "Hey," he said softly. "What's your sister's name?" "Maya," she whispered. "Tell Maya that a lot of people are rooting for her, okay?" The girl nodded, her eyes wide. Sandra felt her throat tighten as she watched. The crowd began to thin, but Keanu stayed back, speaking with the boy. "How much do you need for the surgery?" The boy hesitated, unsure if he could trust the stranger. "A lot," he finally said. "Too much." Keanu nodded slowly, then glanced at Sandra. She understood immediately. Without making a scene, they exchanged a look that said everything. Later, after quietly covering the hospital deposit through a discreet call, they walked away from the performers without a word. The city felt different that night. Not brighter or louder, but softer, as if it had quietly acknowledged their act. As they turned a corner, a gust of wind tugged at Sandra's scarf. Keanu caught it midair, holding it out to her with a playful smirk. "You're impossible," she teased. "You'd miss me if I wasn't," he replied, but their laughter faded when a sudden clap of thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was moving in, fast and unannounced. The first raindrops began to fall, tapping on their shoulders like impatient fingers. "Great," Sandra said, pulling her scarf tighter. "Follow me," Keanu said. They ducked under a theater awning, the marquee above flickering with old movie titles. The rain quickly turned into a downpour, drumming on the pavement. They stood close together, the air between them charged with unspoken things. The streetlight cast a soft glow on Sandra's face, highlighting the strands of hair stuck to her cheek. Keanu watched her, the world around them fading to a blur of rain and neon lights. Finally, she broke the silence. "You scare me sometimes," he frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because you remind me that real kindness still exists, and that can be hard to believe in this world." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Then let's keep proving it." She looked at him, searching for words, but none came. Instead, she stepped a little closer, the storm outside forgotten for a moment. Unbeknownst to them, someone across the street had taken a photo, A candid shot of two friends standing under a marquee, sharing a quiet moment in the rain. By morning, that image would be everywhere, and the world would begin whispering again. But for now, under the thunder and the glow of a flickering sign, they were just Keanu and Sandra, two people holding on to something fragile and real, reminding each other, and maybe the world, that kindness and humility still had a place. The photograph of Keanu and Sandra beneath the rain-soaked marquee became the image of the week. News outlets framed it as a story of friendship and quiet devotion, and fans flooded social media with captions, like "Real kindness still lives and love isn't loud, it's gentle." But for Keanu and Sandra, waking up to another round of headlines wasn't the story's heart. It was the memories the photo didn't show, the nervous laughter under the storm, the whispered promise to keep proving that small gestures mattered, and the silent comfort of two friends who had lived through loss and triumph. Sandra sat at her kitchen island that morning, a mug of tea warming her hands, scrolling through messages from friends and strangers. One message stood out. It was from an old schoolmate she hadn't spoken to in decades. "I saw the photo. Your mom would be so proud. She always said you'd grow into the kind of person who notices the rain only because someone else forgot their umbrella." Sandra's chest tightened. She put down her phone and closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice again. "Real grace is in the pauses between applause." Across the city, Keanu was pacing his living room. The phone on his table buzzed nonstop. Agents, journalists, acquaintances from old projects, but he ignored most of them. His thoughts were elsewhere. On Sandra's laugh when the thunder cracked, on the boy's trembling hands when he saved him, on the way the street performer's sister's name, Maya, had hung in the air like a fragile prayer. He paused at the window. Outside, the world looked washed and new. The city's edges were softer after the storm, as if even the buildings had been reminded to breathe. His phone lit up again. This time it was Sandra. "You up?" He smiled faintly. "Barely. You're trending," she teased. "So are you." "Not what we planned," she replied. "Coffee?" By noon, they met at a small cafe tucked between two bookstores. No paparazzi waited outside, at least not yet. Inside, the cafe smelled of espresso and fresh pastries. A soft song played from a scratched speaker in the corner. Keanu arrived first, choosing a table near the window. When Sandra walked in, wearing a simple black coat and her hair pulled back, he couldn't help but notice how unguarded she looked, like she belonged more in quiet places like this than on red carpets. "You okay?" he asked as she slid into the chair across from him. "I'm fine," she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But are we doing this right? I mean, the world keeps trying to make stories out of moments that weren't meant for them." Keanu nodded. "We can't control what people see, but we can control why we do what we do." Before she could respond, a timid voice interrupted them. A young woman, maybe 20, stood nearby clutching a notebook. Her eyes were wide, and her hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I watched the video of you saving that boy. I've been thinking about giving up on my music. But seeing that, it reminded me that maybe the world still deserves something honest." Keanu glanced at Sandra, then back at the woman. "What's your name?" "Amelia," he gestured to the empty chair beside them. "Sit down, Amelia." She hesitated, then sat. Sandra smiled reassuringly. "Tell us about your music." As Amelia spoke, about small-town open mics, nights spent writing lyrics no one had heard, and the weight of feeling invisible, Keanu and Sandra listened closely. They didn't offer empty encouragement or platitudes. They just listened. Really listened. And it was enough to bring tears to Amelia's eyes. When she left, clutching her notebook tighter, she whispered, "Thank you. I think I'll keep going." After she was gone, Sandra exhaled. "You realize you just changed her life, right?" "Nah," Keanu said softly. She already decided to keep going. We just reminded her. Their conversation was interrupted again, this time by a text from a mutual friend. "Check the news." Keanu opened the link and his brow furrowed. Overnight, the hospital where Maya, the little girl's sister, was supposed to have her surgery, had issued a public statement thanking 2 anonymous donors for covering the cost. The news had leaked, and now people were speculating wildly about who the donors were. "This is going to get loud," Sandra said quietly. "Yeah," Keanu replied. "But maybe loud isn't always bad. Maybe loud reminds people to look closer." Later that afternoon, they visited the hospital. Maya's family was there, waiting nervously in the hallway. The little girl's brother spotted them first. His face lighting up in shock. "You didn't have to come," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. "We wanted to," Sandra said gently. Maya, tiny and fragile, was clutching a worn-out stuffed bunny. She looked up at them with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the nice people?" Keanu knelt beside her. "We're just people who care," he said softly. "But you're the brave one here." The nurses wheeled Maya toward surgery, and her parents hugged them both, their gratitude too big for words. As they left the hospital, Sandra wiped her eyes discreetly. "You okay?" Keanu asked. "Just thinking about my mom," she admitted. "She always said to leave a place better than you found it. I think today we did." They walked out into the fading afternoon light, the city buzzing around them. Neither spoke for a while. Instead, they let the quiet between them stretch, a quiet that felt more powerful than any applause. That evening, they found themselves walking along the riverfront, where the city lights shimmered on the water like scattered stars. The wind tugged at their coats, and distant music from a street band floated across the night air. "Do you ever feel like the world forgets what really matters?" Sandra asked suddenly. "All the time," Keanu said. "But then, a kid smiles, or a stranger says thank you, or someone remembers their mom's advice. And for a moment, it feels like maybe we're okay." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "You're too humble for your own good, you know that?" He laughed softly. "Takes one to know one." A group of children ran past them, chasing each other and laughing, their joy echoing against the water. Sandra watched them, her heart tightening with a strange mix of nostalgia and hope. They reached a small pedestrian bridge and stopped halfway across. The city stretched before them, alive but distant. Sandra leaned against the railing. "Keanu," she said quietly, "why do you think kindness feels so rare these days?" He took a long breath, his gaze fixed on the water below. "Maybe because it doesn't trend as fast as anger. But that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means we have to fight harder to see it." She studied his face, the way the light carved soft shadows across his features. "I'm glad you're in my life," she whispered. He looked at her, his expression unreadable but gentle. "Me too," he said. A light rain began to fall again, misting the bridge. Instead of running for cover, they stayed, letting the drizzle wash over them. The world outside might have been noisy with headlines and speculation, but on that bridge, under a quiet sky, the only truth that mattered was this: kindness. Respect and humility still had a heartbeat, and they were carrying it forward together. The drizzle from the bridge had turned into a steady rain by the time Keanu dropped Sandra at her apartment. He lingered for a moment, watching her walk up the steps, her coat damp but her shoulders steady. The city lights glimmered in the puddles. At his feet and somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a slow, aching tune. As Sandra disappeared behind her door, Keanu felt a quiet sense of purpose stirring in his chest, a reminder that their small actions had begun to ripple outward in ways neither of them fully understood. The next morning, the world had already turned their simple acts into headlines again. Blogs speculated about romance. Tabloids dissected every photograph, and fans flooded social media with montages of their kindness. But beneath the noise, something deeper was happening. People were talking about compassion, about respect, about how small gestures could shift a day or even a life. Sandra scrolled through her phone at her kitchen table, her tea growing cold. Among the chaos of posts, one comment stopped her mid-scroll. It was from a young teacher in a rural school. "After seeing you both help that little girl, I started a kindness board in my classroom. Today, my students wrote the first note. Share your lunch with someone who forgot theirs. Maybe this is how change starts." Sandra pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears stung her eyes, but she smiled. a quiet, trembling smile that belonged only to the private moments before the world wakes up. Meanwhile, Keanu was walking through a quiet neighborhood, his hood pulled low to avoid attention. He needed air, needed the rhythm of footsteps on pavement to make sense of the noise. He passed a small community center where children were painting. A mural on the wall, a splash of colors depicting open hands, bright suns, and words like hope and kindness. A little boy holding a paintbrush glanced up at him. "Are you the man who saved that kid?" he asked in a small, awed voice. Keanu hesitated, then knelt beside him. "Maybe," he said with a small grin. "But I think you're the one making the world brighter right now." The boy giggled, dipping his brush into yellow paint. "Want to help?" Keanu looked down at his hands, then back at the boy. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I do." For the next hour, he painted quietly with the children. Sun rays, flowers, small stars, nothing that would make the news, but everything that would leave a mark on the wall and on their hearts. Later that afternoon, Sandra called. "Guess what I saw online?" "Another rumor?" he teased. "No," she said, laughing. "Someone posted a blurry photo of you painting with kids. They called you the accidental hero with a paintbrush." Keanu groaned softly, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "Guess I'm not great at staying invisible." Her laughter faded into a softer tone. "Do you ever think maybe these moments, maybe they're not accidents at all?" He thought about it. Maybe they're reminders. They decided to meet again that evening, this time at an old jazz bar neither of them had visited in years. The bar was dimly lit, the air rich with the scent of wood polish and aged whiskey. A live band played a slow, soulful tune that curled through the room like smoke. They chose a booth in the back, away from curious glances. Sandra traced a finger along the edge of her glass. "Every time something like this happens," she said quietly, "I hear my mom's voice. She used to tell me to look for the good, even when the world feels dark." Keanu nodded, his gaze distant. "My mom used to say, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." For a while, they didn't talk. They just listened to the music, letting the saxophone fill the spaces between them. Then Sandra leaned in. "What if we did something bigger, something that wasn't about us at all?" Keanu looked at her, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "What if we used all this attention, this noise, for something that matters, not a charity gala or a press release? Something real, something quiet but powerful." He considered it, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Like what?" "Like finding ways to honor the small kindnesses, the ones no one celebrates." Keanu leaned back, the idea taking root in his mind. "We could start small. Fund local community projects anonymously. Maybe encourage people to share stories of the everyday heroes in their lives." Sandra's eyes lit up. "Yes, and no names, no credit, just kindness, multiplied." The band shifted to a softer melody as if underscoring the moment. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual noise. But inside the booth, the world felt quieter, sharper, more alive. Later, as they left the bar, a gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter from a nearby street. They paused under a flickering lamppost. "You ever think about how strange this all is?" Sandra asked. "Strange? Yeah. Two actors, in a world full of cameras, trying to keep kindness invisible." Keanu smiled, a quiet, thoughtful smile. Maybe that's exactly why it works. As they began walking, a small figure stepped out from the shadows, a teenage boy clutching a camera. He looked nervous. I didn't mean to spy," he stammered. I wanted a photo." "But then, I heard what you said." Sandra and Keanu exchanged glances. Instead of anger, Sandra smiled gently. "What did you hear?" The boy shifted awkwardly. "That kindness doesn't need names. I think I think I want to do that too. Keanu stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. Then don't just take a photo. Take a memory and turn it into something that matters. The boy lowered his camera, his eyes bright with understanding. He nodded and slipped away into the night. As the city stretched out before them, Sandra whispered, "This is bigger than us now." Keanu looked at her, the streetlight casting a halo around her face. "Good," he said softly. "That's how it should be." Far from the cameras and headlines, they kept walking, two silhouettes beneath the city's restless sky, unaware of the twists still waiting for them, of the test that would challenge everything they believed about resilience, humility, and trust. The morning after the jazz bar conversation, the city woke to another wave of chatter. Blogs speculated about a secret project. A grainy photo of Keanu and Sandra speaking to the teenage boy had already begun circulating. But the two of them didn't open their phones right away. Instead, Keanu brewed coffee slowly in his quiet apartment, and Sandra sat on her balcony, watching sunlight drip between the buildings like warm honey. By noon, they met at a small lakeside park outside the city, a place Sandra had visited with her mother long ago. The park was almost empty except for an elderly man feeding ducks. A light breeze carried the scent of water and pine. "This was my mom's favorite spot," Sandra said softly as she joined Keanu by the lake. "She'd bring me here when the world felt too loud." Keanu glanced around, taking in the stillness. "It's perfect." She smiled faintly. "She used to tell me that still water hides deep stories. I didn't understand it back then. I think I do now." They walked along the trail, shoes crunching on gravel. The plan they had talked about, the quiet kindness project, was beginning to take shape in their minds. They decided to start small, a network of anonymous donors funding everyday heroes and community projects. No public credit, no press, just quiet help where it mattered. As they sat on a bench beneath a willow tree, Keanu took out a worn notebook. "I've been writing down names," he said. "People I've met, stories I've heard. Like Amelia, the musician, the kids painting the mural, the nurse who almost quit. All of them remind me why this matters." Sandra took the notebook and flipped through the pages. Her eyes softened. This is beautiful." A sudden shout interrupted them. A distressed voice from across the lake. A small rowboat had drifted too far from the dock, and a man inside was frantically waving. The wind had picked up, pushing him toward a cluster of rocks. Without hesitation, Keanu kicked off his shoes and waded into the water. The cold bit at his skin, but he kept going, swimming toward the struggling boat. Sandra grabbed a rope from a nearby dock and ran around the shore, shouting encouragement. Keanu reached the boat, steadied it, and helped guide it back toward the dock where Sandra secured the rope. The man inside, a tourist unfamiliar with the lake's currents, clutched Keanu's shoulder, breathless and shaken. "Thank you," he gasped. Keanu just nodded, helping him ashore. Sandra placed a comforting hand on the man's arm. "You're safe now." By the time emergency responders arrived, the man was sitting on the bench, wrapped in a blanket someone had brought. A small crowd had gathered, whispering and pointing. But Keanu and Sandra slipped away quietly, not waiting for cameras or applause. Later that day, sitting in her living room, Sandra watched raindrops race down her window. She thought of her mother's teachings, of the nurse's note, of the girl's sign for Maya's surgery, of the quiet boy with the paintbrush. She thought of Keanu stepping into freezing water without a second thought. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya's family. "Maya is out of surgery. It went perfectly. She's smiling already." Sandra's throat tightened as she typed a reply. An hour later, she met Keanu at the community center where the mural was being finished. Children ran around laughing, their hands stained with paint. Amelia was there too, guitar slung over her shoulder, preparing to play for the kids. Keanu watched as Sandra bent down to speak with a small boy about the colors he was using. Her laughter mixed with the children's giggles. When she stood, she caught him looking at her. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just thinking. Your mom would be proud." Her eyes shimmered. "And yours?" "She'd probably tell me to stop making a scene," he chuckled. "But deep down, yeah, she'd be proud too." The kids gathered around as Amelia began to play, her voice carrying a song about hope and small kindnesses. Parents watched, some wiping away tears. The mural was almost finished, a swirl of colors forming two hands reaching toward each other, surrounded by words painted by the kids. Hope, respect, kindness, trust. Sandra and Keanu stepped back to admire it. No cameras, no reporters, just the quiet hum of community. A teenage girl who had been painting earlier approached them shyly. "Are you really starting something?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Sandra replied gently. "People are saying, 'You're helping like everywhere, even if you don't say it.'" Keanu crouched to meet her eyes. "We're not starting something," he said softly. "We're just remembering something. Kindness isn't new. It's always been here. Sometimes it just needs a little light." As evening fell, the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting the park and the mural in a warm, golden glow. The children began to pack up their brushes, and parents called them home for dinner. Amelia played one last soft chord before closing her guitar case. Keanu and Sandra stood side by side, watching the sky fade into twilight. "Do you think this will last?" Sandra asked quietly. "The stories?" he replied. "No. The feeling," Keanu considered it. "Feelings fade. But the choices we make because of them, those last." She looked at him, her lips curling into a small, hopeful smile. "Then let's keep choosing." They stayed until the last child left, the mural drying in the cool evening air. As they walked away together, the sound of distant laughter and the rustle of leaves followed them. The city beyond might still chase headlines and noise, but here, in the soft afterglow of a day filled with quiet acts, they had found something worth holding on to. The next morning, Steve Harvey played a short clip from their first interview again, reminding viewers why it had touched so many. "Folks," he said, smiling warmly, "we talk about stars on this show all the time. But sometimes the brightest stars aren't on a screen. They're the moments we don't see, like a woman honoring her mom, or a man jumping into cold water for a stranger, or two friends reminding the world to be gentle." As his words faded, the screen cut to a photo of the finished mural, sunlight spilling across its bright colors. Below it, small letters the kids had painted read, "Kindness doesn't need applause," and somewhere far from cameras, Keanu and Sandra walked through a quiet street, laughing softly about nothing important, already planning the next small thing they could do to make the world a little softer. The story had no grand finale, no final curtain call, just a simple truth. The smallest moments often carry the loudest echoes.